Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first Group Chairs Professional Development Session. This year, we are hosting 4 Group Chair Professional Development Sessions, which will take place prior to our quarterly Group Chair meetings. For today's session, we are delighted to be joined by Robert Pitts and Will Pritchard from Parn, the Professional Associations Research Network. Just before I pass over to Robert and Will, I'd just like to let everyone know that if you've got any questions throughout this session, please type them into the Q&A tab. Robert and Will be aiming to answer these questions as we go along through the session, but don't worry if your questions can't get answered during the session, they'll be in touch afterwards to answer these. So that's enough from me. I know we've got a tight schedule, so I'm going to pass over to Robert and Will, who can begin the session.
Thank you, Paul. I just very quickly introduce myself. My name is Robert Pitts. I'm the Deputy CEO at Parn. I've been there for 7 years. And my colleague here, Will Pritchard. Will, do you want to just introduce yourself too?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Hi, everyone. I'm the services manager at Parn, and what me and Robert are going to do today is sort of split the session into two groups. The first is around sort of chairing effective meetings. Second, around managing volunteers. I'll be picking that bit up a little bit later on in the session.
Excellent, thanks, Will. Okay, so we are going to look, as Will says, we're going to look at running meetings, successful meetings, some of the key elements of successful groups and committees. A little bit on governance, professional body structures, and some facts and figures. And then I think Will's going to do some work on volunteer management. So if we can hit the slides, please. First slide is our advert, a little bit about Parn. So we were established in 1998, 25 years ago, our anniversary. We're a not-for-profit membership organisation. We have about 120 members. We represent a sector that probably covers nearly 7 million professionals. So it's a huge sector when it's taken as a whole. We're a centre of knowledge on pretty much everything that professional bodies do, ranging from governance, finance, membership, standards and regulation. A lot of our expertise, experience and perspectives are based on our own research and our own consultancy. Okay, first slide then. We're going to start with a problem. We're going to start with a dilemma. In fact, this dilemma is common probably to all organizations where there is a separation between those who manage the organization and the owners or the stakeholders, the members, if you like, to whom the organization is responsible. And the dilemma is that the governance structures that allow maximum flexibility and efficiency and strategic support to those who manage the organization don't necessarily allow a very strong voice for those for whom the mission is organized or designed, and particularly when there are lots of them, as with a membership organization. Now, this is less of a dilemma in private companies where ownership is concentrated into the hands of a few. They can very easily get on to the board, sit on the board and change direction of the organization. But also it's less of a problem where individual owners aren't really interested in the day-to-day running of the organization. What they're really interested in is returns on their investment. And where those returns on their investment aren't enough, then it's very easy for them to remove their investment and take their money elsewhere. So next slide, please, Will. So it's much more of an issue for professional associations. It's because they are membership organizations and ownership is widely dispersed because their members have substantial vested interests. It can be emotional interest, it can be financial interest. In other words, their professions are their livelihoods. So it's really difficult to change profession. It means there's a greater need for governance structures to be underpinned by democratic and representative processes, which provide mechanisms for the views of the owners, of the members, to come to the governing body, to be heard within that governance structure. That is something that will underpin everything I think that we're going to look at today, certainly in the first half. I think probably as well some of the volunteer management too. So that member voice coming to the sorry, well, go on, please go ahead. you are slightly ahead of me. Now, what's been happening over the last 10, 20 years within governance structures in professional bodies has been quite interesting. Certainly, there's been a significant shift towards much smaller boards. that are able to maintain a good strategic focus. So we've seen an increase both in smaller boards, but also in something else, a dual structured model with a strategic board and a larger supportive council. It's a structure that allows the member voice to be heard clearly and effectively by the governing body, if you like, by the ruling council. Current changes, so if you want to move on, yeah, current changes continue actually to reinforce this movement, this trajectory towards much smaller executive boards and much more self-contained executive boards. Further expansion of that, and a further expansion too of this dual structure with a small executive board and around it, still part of the governance structure, but advising in some ways the sort of the legacy, if you like, of the old council. And that is called, as I said, the cupped hands model, and it's very similar, I think, to the structure that the Institute has. If you think of yourselves, there will be an executive board at the center, and then you've got your governance structure, your branch structure around that, which is supporting it, but is allowing the member voice to flow into that central executive board. So hopefully that makes sense, and it rings bells. You'll think, ah, yes, okay, that does sound like the sort of structure that we have. So if you move to the next slide, we can see here, we can note data from our 2022 survey. The analysis was actually only completed this year, last month, so it really is hot off the press, if you like. And these are the forms of governing structures in the UK. Single board council counts for about 15% of all professional bodies in the UK. Single board executive board, single body, 46%, almost half of all professional bodies have that structure. Then there's this rather weird dual structure where the council is the governing body, but there is also a very small executive board that actually, if you like, does the work. It engages with the management team. 5%, not very popular, and it is a bit of a peculiarity. And then finally here, we've got your dual structure executive board acting as your governing body, but then around it, you've got this broader governance structure, often, as I say, a legacy from the old council. Those four models really represent probably 95, 96% of all professional bodies in the UK. Other here are rarities. It's a cooperative, and there's one that's actually run by members, and there's one actually that's still maintaining a dual structure, but two structures that come from two organizations that merged. So pretty uncommon and real outliers. I think we can consider them as outliers. The next slide is interesting. We can see some clear trends that have developed over the years. So if we look back at that single body council, now these are big, huge councils. There's still some in existence. You can see 2022, 15%. Organizations like the Law Society has a huge single council, about 120 people on it. Back in 2006, about a third of all professional bodies would have had the single large council, but you can see how it's shrunk over the years until today it's 15%. Single body executive board, you can see, has gone in exactly the opposite direction. So 14% back in 2006, quite a rarity. In fact, the most uncommon of all the four structures. Today, almost half of all professional bodies have that simplified version. Then that rarity, that odd one, which was actually quite common back in the mists of time. And then the dual structure executive board, which is the cupped hands model, slowly and steadily increasing and representing about a third of all professional bodies today. We don't know whether the move towards dual structure is seen as a stepping stone towards eventually becoming and having a single executive board. It is possible that that is part of the process. Okay, so we're now going to just think of the the actual governance process. And I've just produced this very simple matrix, probably over simple really, but so firstly, on the top left-hand side, you see outer actors. They're concerned with the general mission of the organization, core aims, core objectives, which they set for the inner actors, those on the right-hand side. But moving first, though, to the bottom left here, we've got the same outer actors. This time, they're concerned with monitoring and evaluating how the inner actors have been achieving those objectives. Then on the right-hand side are the inner actors, top right. They're implementing the strategies set by those outer actors, okay? And when they do that, they may actually implement even finer tuned strategies for those even closer to the coalface, so other members of staff. And finally, the bottom right here, you've got those inner actors reporting back to the outer actors on how they have achieved the actions that were set for them. So you will hopefully immediately appreciate that on the left-hand side, you have effectively those involved within the governance structure, your directors and trustees. And then on the right-hand side, you will have largely members of staff who are putting into action the strategy. Oversimplification, as I say, there are exceptions, but hopefully that gives you a handle on the sort of the governance process. So the next slide covers just very simply what the strategic group should be concerned with. Strategic group is also, if you like, any committee and panel that's engaged within the governance structure. These are the key elements. They should be identifying key elements for success in sustaining aims and objectives of the Institute and establishing a strategic planning process in order to achieve it. They should adopt risk assessments, define management for risk control and mitigation, set measurable goals, and then monitor the achievement of the aims and objectives against those goals. So that is what your strategic group should do. Very quickly, and the next slide just covers how you can get the best out of directors and trustees. And this is what should be happening to you. These are things that you should be being offered. You hopefully are being given the opportunity to be supported in understanding your roles and developing your skills to govern your branch teams, your specialist groups, and any other governance committees and panels. And one way of doing it is through induction. Majority of professional bodies in the UK now, around about 74–75%, have some form of induction. Just over half include formal face-to-face induction and training. In our experience, we would recommend that. It's much better than the sort of senior volunteer written manual approach, which doesn't seem to be as effective. The other way to make sure that you have good performance within your governance structures is to have performance reviews. It's still a relatively new area. Just over a third of professional bodies in the UK now will have some form of performance review, and it'd be very interesting to hear from you whether you have something in place that assesses your performance. Much better to have group assessment, collegiate assessment, because you work as groups, you don't work as individuals, hopefully. So individual assessment, appraisal even, we don't recommend, but we do recommend it at a collegiate level. That's how we want our groups to perform. Okay, couple of deadly sins and board competencies. Firstly, 3 deadly sins: micromanagement, really meddling in operational issues might be a better phrase, and I'm sure that some of you may well have sat in key strategic meetings, but actually spent some time talking about next year's Christmas cards, or what to do with the photocopier lease now that no one's in the office. Those aren't best left for your operations team, which is your staff team. Sectionalism. This really concerns those groups which pull in representation from the regions. Now, I'm guessing that your regional groups will be represented on the board, but remember that where you are on the board representing your regional group, you're also representing all the activities of your organization. It's not good enough to just say, well, actually, you're not talking about Wales at the moment, so I'm not having any input into this. It actually, you're there as a representative of the board for all the activities of the Institute. And the final one here is uneven commitment and single issue directors, where they are only there really to ensure that move to the new headquarters is affordable. When I was at the National Trust many years ago, probably more than I care to remember, but there was a huge influx of new trustees from PETA and from the RSPCA. They were there for one thing, that was to make sure that the National Trust didn't vote for stag hunting on its property, on its open spaces. Well, the National Trust had already reached the conclusion that it couldn't possibly do that anyway because of conservation. But nevertheless, those trustees were there to do it. They won the day because the National Trust was fully behind it. But what it meant was that the organization was left with a number of trustees who weren't interested in anything else, but would still turn up to meetings and clog up the works, but weren't actually moving on. So just beware of uneven commitment from members in your committees. It can really cause problems. Moving to board competencies, I've identified 6 here, and they are for committees, panels, and boards. Firstly, contextual. These are all things that you would want to measure as well. So contextual, the extent that your panel, your committee understands and takes into account the culture, the values, the mission of the organization, the community within which it exists and works. Secondly, educational, so the extent to which the committee is aware of the organization's roles, responsibilities, and performance. Third, interpersonal, so this is inward looking, if you like, the way the committee nurtures the development of all its members, encourages group working, cohesiveness, and teamwork. Analytical, the way that the committee recognizes complexities and subtleties of issues and insights, and that it will even encourage concrete and even contradictory reviews and views. It will consult outsiders. It will encourage people to talk out against maybe proposals and recommendations, and will explore negative aspects of its recommendations. Important one. Political, accepting responsibility for developing and maintaining healthy two-way relationships with key constituencies. That would include membership, council, government, executive, of course. Finally, strategic. So this is assisting in the shaping of the Institute's direction and strategic approach to the organization's approach. I would suggest all those should form a part of an inward review of your branch structures. You want to measure those. Those are key elements. Okay, we're going to move to effective chair. Mao Zedong, probably a highly effective chair. I'm sure he was. After all, he was responsible for unifying a hugely diverse and disparate country. He tripled GDP, he instigated gender equality, and ran one of the largest, if not the most disastrous economies in human history. He's probably deserving of his place as one of China's historical figures, probably not a good model for what makes a good chair and what makes effective meetings. Did he run effective meetings? I suspect not, but I'm going to give you 3 steps to hopefully running effective meetings as follows. Firstly, well, actually, planning, ensuring good structure, and reviewing. It's as simple as that. And it's a simple cycle for all the meetings that you run. I'll just take each of those in turn. So taking each of those steps. So firstly, pre-meeting preparation. You want to move to, sorry, yeah, thanks. Planning, deciding who, when, where the meeting is going to be. Make sure you pin down the aims and encapsulate that in a title if you can, and decide how much time you're going to need in order to achieve the outcome, the results that you hope to achieve from that meeting. Circulate papers in really good time. Good time is 2 weeks. Not so good is a week. Anything less than a week is really not actually up to scratch at all. Be mindful of GDPR, of course, but nevertheless, it's still really good to have a list of all attendees who are coming to your branch or your structure meeting, and include contact details if you can. And make sure that the pre-meet info that goes out identifies you in your role as chair or in your role as officer of that branch, committee, whatever. Looking next at meeting structure, make sure that you take meeting notes. Meeting notes are legal documents if you're within the governance structure, which I believe you all are. So they are legal documents. As such, they need to be kept for a certain amount of time, not 6 years, as your financial documents need to be kept for, but for 10 years. That catches people out quite often. Ensure that everybody who attends knows why they've been invited. If you have time, have introductions. And we've not done that today because I suspect if we had done, we would have run out of time, or we'd be just starting on the first slide now. Stay on message and make sure that people who do voice off message issues, take them outside the meeting. Tell them that you will take them outside the meeting. Make sure you recognize others' interests and their objections. Don't just knock them back, and ensure that you review next steps at the close. And it's a good idea to build time in so that you can finish early. Everyone will feel happy because they'll feel they've cheated the system slightly if they finish the meeting 10 minutes early. So build that in. Post-meeting follow-up, review element, if you like, circulate meeting notes as soon as possible. Sorry, next slide. Sorry, Will. As soon as possible, don't leave any more than a week before they go out. And at the same time, confirm any follow-up meetings and schedules. Also use it as an opportunity to confirm the actions that you've agreed and to confirm any assignments that have been agreed or any task groups that have been set up. Make notes of the things that went well. This is for yourself. Make notes of things that went well and make notes of things that went less well. It's also a good idea actually at the end of the meeting to ask everyone how it went for them if you have the time. So 10 commandments. Keep to time, stick to the agenda, prepare, respect all voices, listen. That should be active listening. We run a short session on active listening. We don't have time to do it today, but active listening. Ask for more information. You will require it. I'm almost certain you will. Resist being critical. So hear people out. Don't readily dismiss new and old ideas. It's all too easy to say, oh yeah, we tried that 4 years ago and it didn't work. It's just too easy. Don't do that. Be clear and concise. Remain positive. Clearing the decks. Next slide. This is for your meetings. Make sure you remove meeting clutter. A couple of good points here. Documents should be available for the meeting, as we've said. Stick to the agenda. Keep your minutes and matters from your previous meeting to the end. You don't want to use up, when everyone arrives at the meeting, virtual or in face-to-face, they've got all the energy in the world. But what we all do is then spend all that, dissipate all that energy and all that positive thinking on looking at the matters and minutes from the last meeting. By the time we get to the real substance of the meeting, everyone is a bit tired. So actually keep your minutes and matters arising from the previous meeting to the end. I don't know why, it's a tradition that we seem to stick with. Uniformity of documents, make sure all your documents look and feel the same so people find their way around them really quickly. Keep to the same structure each meeting. I've just said change your minutes and matters arising to the end, but I think you'd be excused for making that change. Expressions of interest, it says here, actually it's just conflicts of interest. Statements should be made at the beginning of the meeting and not at the end, as I have seen on one occasion. And close obviously with a round table. Any other business, always allow that. And confirm the date of your next meeting. Very quickly, I'm going to run through some key pointers on our virtual meetings. First of all, telephone meetings. Until really recently, telephone meetings were quite common, but how quickly things have changed. This today feels like very old technology for many of us. The dial-in and the multiple conference call causing all sorts of issues and problems, and all the different platforms that were out there. Who remembers platforms such as, and some of them still do exist, GoToMeeting, Powwow Now, Skype still certainly exists, WebEx, any meeting, a buddy meeting. Many of these do now offer, you know, web-based conferencing and screen sharing. The ones that don't are almost certainly no longer in existence. And then I think most of us now will have moved to a diet of virtual online meetings. Next slide, Will. And these will have platforms, next slide, such as Zoom, MS Teams, BlueJeans, Google Meet, Skype, House Party. Some of them allow multiple people to speak at multiple times, which can be incredibly confusing and not really useful for business meetings. So BlueJeans and House Party are designed to do that. Everyone can talk at the same time. It can be just a nightmare. But if you try doing that with MS Teams or Zoom, you'll find that your ability to speak is weirdly suppressed, or you just won't be heard, or you will override the other person speaking. So that's a better platform. Just a few tips for both of these, telephone and virtual. Make sure there is a dial-in option, because not always will people have sufficient broad bandwidth to be visual. Make sure that you let everyone know how to join. Now, thankfully, MS Teams and Zoom will automatically send out all the joining instructions with the invite. Chair should always be at the meeting first. I think that's really quite important. And try and remember to mute when others are talking. Take the lead to control multiple speakers, although it's not always an issue with some platforms. Solicit feedback to make sure that everyone is still with you. Use the general meeting tips as well from the general meetings I mentioned earlier. And then finally, active listening. Employ active listening. Just a few facts. Remarkably, 1 in 10 of us spends over 6 hours every day on virtual meetings, believe it or not. 96% of us have at least 4 meetings on virtual meetings every day. According to CV Library, another research group, over 75% of Brits believe that virtual meetings are a complete waste of time. So bear that in mind. Also, most researchers found that the most productive virtual meetings, and we include here telephones, are just 30 minutes long. So I'll stop there because I think that's 30 minutes. And I will hand over now to Will. Did we not have any questions at all as we went?
It doesn't look like we've had
Okay.
questions. No. Yeah. So what I will do is I'll just say, if you did have any questions for Robert, please post them in the chat. Please post them via the Q&A. We probably will have time at the end of the session for a very quick Q&A. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can. So if anything comes up, then please feel free to come in. We have a comment saying, thanks, Robert, that was very helpful. So people are definitely hearing us. It's always difficult with these webinars to know you're not speaking into the void, and that people can actually hear what you're saying. So that's good. So yeah, if you've got questions for Robert, please feed them in now. What we'll probably do is we'll take everything at the end of this session, probably the best way to do it moving forward. And any questions for me, indeed, and anything that comes up, posted in the chat. In the meantime, given we've got about half an hour remaining, which should be more than enough time to cover this and a bit of a quick Q&A, we're going to talk about managing volunteers. Now, this is something that at most professional bodies is typically handled by staff, internal staff, but obviously as chairs you do have some involvement in the managing of volunteers, and indeed are probably the frontline approach of managing volunteers. And just to set the scene for what we're going to talk about today, I thought it would be interesting to start with just a quick look at the roles that volunteers play at professional associations. This is data taken from our professional body benchmarking survey, looking at every professional body across the UK, getting as many of them to fill it out. And it presents a wide picture, and I won't run through them all because there's a lot on there. But what I want you to take away from that is the extent to which volunteers are actually used at professional associations. I'm sure you can recognize your own groups within here, and hopefully you will, and say, yep, there we are. But there might be areas where you see volunteers used at other professional associations that aren't used at CIPR. And that typically starts from that. That's typically due to the fact that professional bodies start from a member-driven organisation. They start from that, perhaps a couple of people around a kitchen table saying, we've got a great new idea for a professional body. They work in the profession and they say, let's get it up and running. And it's mostly driven by volunteer management. Over time, professionalization comes in and we see the professionalization of a professional body. Staff members come in, more formal structures come in, and the role that volunteers plays slowly drops off. But what you can still see is how absolutely vital it is for a professional association to have a good, strong network of volunteers. And when those volunteers are doing their jobs incredibly well, the professional body is able to run incredibly well. Ties into that idea Robert was talking about earlier of strategic and democratic. I won't go into it again now, but as we see the organization perhaps becoming less democratic, more driven by those staff, you still really need to keep that strong involvement from your volunteers at that lower level. So how do you get the most out of volunteers? When you've got people turning up for their meetings, you're in charge of perhaps a new group, perhaps there's some old hats who are quite experienced, maybe you've got some people who are volunteering for the first time. How can you get the most out of them? And I thought I'd start with a bit of a negative, really. This is some work taken from a survey by the Institute for Volunteering, and the figures they came out with show that 70% of volunteers felt that activities are not well organised by staff, especially when staff use volunteers to coordinate or manage other volunteers. They felt they were bored with what they were asked to do. They were overloaded in relation to time. They into the time they wanted to spend contributing. And perhaps most damning of all, there was a bit of a lack of appreciation for what they did. It's not a great place to start with, but I thought it is a good place to start with because it goes to show the issues you can have with your volunteers and areas which you should be looking to try to address and fix as a chair. And I think none of these are particularly significant issues in terms of whether or not they can be fixed. These can all be addressed, they can all be fixed, and we've got some tips to build on. So the first is to elaborate on what Robert was saying earlier, in terms of one of the best ways to bring on board new volunteers. And one of them might be through serious induction and CPD as well. At the initial point of induction, at the initial point of engagement, there should be an induction. And it's entirely possible you may want to link this and connect it to CPD as well. Often volunteering, and I think this is the case at CIPR, is linked to CPD. It is a part of professional development, and emphasising that is really important. Picking up on what Robert was talking about earlier, the idea of inductions being just handing someone the handbook. That is often the case. That's often what we see at professional bodies. It's, yeah, there's the handbook, have a quick read of it. It covers the objects, the bylaws, the structure, and then you move on. It's not a particularly great approach. It's not a great way to bring someone on board. And when you do induction well, you can create an inclusive feeling right from the beginning, a sense of I'm actually part of this structure, I've got a voice, and I've got something that I can feed in here. It can build retention and ensure that everyone is on the right track, everyone's clear of what their role is and what they should be doing. And it can also help keep the focus on the core issues, cutting through the procedures and sector jargon that might be off-putting. The last thing you want, particularly when you're bringing in new volunteers who are there to have a voice, is people who sit there thinking, well, my job is maybe just to not say anything for my first few meetings. If they're part of the group, then they're there to have a voice, they're there to have a say, and you want to encourage that. Another way that you might want to look at that is introducing a form of mentoring, perhaps pairing first-year volunteers with more experienced volunteers. It's a great way just to help provide an induction that is a little bit more concrete than just running over some of the basics, and having something that's about constant reflection. Also a good way for more experienced volunteers to perhaps reflect on their own contribution. A good chance to when they're handing down that information, make sure that they're adhering to it as well. On top of that, create some volunteer development paths as well. I'm sure most of your groups will have vice chairs, but if your groups don't have vice chairs, might be something worth looking at, making sure that there's always a pipeline of progression throughout the group system, so that you're not just losing people, or people come in and perhaps that's about it. You actually work out a way where people can feel like they're making some professional development, not just in their own career, but also as a volunteer. So let's get on to this issue of time commitment. Now, I think one of the most important things is that if there is a significant time commitment required, you shouldn't undersell it. You shouldn't underestimate it. You can be respectful of people's time whilst also making sure that the expectations for their role are clear from the very beginning. There's nothing wrong with that, but as long as it's done at the beginning and perhaps even at recruitment level, it allows you to be in a good position. But as a chair, you might want to consider and recognise the fact that there are different motivations for different volunteers. Everyone will have their own individual aims. Some might want a bit more of a quiet life. Some might really want a challenge. They might really want to roll their sleeves up and address every single thing, whereas some may just want to contribute and just make sure things tick along at the right time. As a chair, it's your job to understand what makes them tick. What are their motivations? Perhaps survey them at the beginning of a session, or perhaps maybe it's something you do once a year. Get an idea of the different motivations that your volunteers actually have. It's not about changing what's expected of them, but it's about understanding what drives them, what motivates them. You do have to accept there may be some level of unreliability, and if you can, of course, it's the golden ticket if you've got a lot of people wishing to volunteer. But if you can build in some excess capacity, make sure that during those times where someone's particularly busy in their professional life, that you've still got the capacity as a group to get the things done that you need to get things done. Another issue you might find is that there's a bit of a lack of skills or wrong skills, and this can be an area where you could look at providing training, speak to HQ about what you might be able to offer. Although a bit of a health warning here, you do need to manage expectations. It might be that there isn't training available, there's simply not the budget for it. If that is a bit of an issue, making sure that people are aware there's not going to be unlimited training or endless training is a good session. But I think given that we're doing this meeting today, it goes to show CIPR do value the importance of offering training for their volunteers. But another way you can address the idea of a skills gap or wrong skills can be introducing some form of mentoring. Look to hand down skills, particularly if you know that someone is looking to move on from their volunteering role. Try to make sure that you keep those skills in-house as long as possible by having them mentoring and handing down, or even looking at the recruitment approach. Rather than just having a broad recruitment strategy, maybe have a bit more of a focus and a little bit more specific recruitment strategy. And finally, have a watertight code of conduct for volunteers, which can also include what they can expect from yourself as a chair and from the staff at CIPR. Make sure everyone reads it as well. The number of times we'll encounter codes of conduct that people don't bother to read or don't adhere to is quite surprising. Excuse me. Then finally, this issue of volunteers not feeling appreciated. Okay, as a chair, you might say, well, that's really for HQ to be looking at. That's something that they should be considering, and it certainly is. They absolutely should be considering it, but it doesn't mean that you can't use your voice to push it in that direction, and it doesn't mean that there aren't areas where you can do it yourself. So we've got a few things up here that tie in with the idea of rewarding, the idea of possibly having some sort of awards. If you do make sure that the criteria for these are written down and made clear and available to everyone. This can save a lot of grief if you ever do get challenged upon, well, how come this person's won an award and I haven't? And make sure you stick to the criteria. Don't just say, well, it's time for someone to get an award. Possibly look at featuring stories or case studies, acknowledging sources of successful ideas in reports, journals, magazines, e-newsletters. If your group puts something like this out, spotlight those volunteers, spotlight the people who are actually helping run the group and make it work. Perhaps consider incentive schemes, especially when recruiting new members. I'll talk about those a little bit later on in this session. And finally, perhaps consider writing letters to employers saying that this person is actively supporting and working for the profession. It's a great way for people to actually feel, yeah, they do actually appreciate and they do care about me. I think one last thing to say about appreciating volunteers is tying in with everything Robert has sort of said at the beginning of the session. One way to appreciate volunteers is just to make sure your communication with them is good and your communication with them is strong. Let them know that they're appreciated. Make sure that you do value their time. Get papers out to them with good time and show that you're respectful of it. When communication is done well, people can often feel like they are really appreciated. So those three different approaches can be a good way to start to get the best out of volunteers, and certainly goes some way to addressing those issues that the Institute of Volunteering found. But once you've got your volunteers and once you're doing well, you then get onto the issue of reviews. This picks up on what Robert was talking about earlier as well, but I thought I'd maybe just mention it in a little bit more depth, spend a little bit more time on it. So, evaluation and review, the idea of a collective review. And as Robert said, this is probably the approach you really want to be looking towards. You are a group and you do want to review yourselves as a group. And these are the areas you might look at. Has your group fulfilled its targets set for the time at issue? If not, what have been the barriers? How can you improve? And look at even setting targets for achievement and actions for improvement for the next period. Set KPIs and measure yourselves against those. It's not always doom and gloom. I think often review can be thought of as, oh well, they're gonna, it's a chance for us to catch us out. It's a chance to, yes, it's a chance to see where you're going wrong, but it's also a good chance to see where you're going right. Now, we did say that collective review is the right approach, but you may also want to consider individual review as well. And this can take three forms, the three forms that you might look at. The first would just be a self-review. Ask members of your group, ask individual volunteers to consider themselves and perhaps ask themselves questions such as, have I sought clarification on matters that I don't understand? Have I sought the views of members who well, here we have elected me, but I wouldn't necessarily even say elected. Have I sought the views of other members? I'm perhaps here to represent them. I'm here to be a voice for them. Am I actually out there talking to people, making sure that when I'm up here, when I'm part of the group talking about things, am I doing the right thing? You might even consider a peer review. Actually ask individuals to review each other and answer those same questions. Has this board member contributed in a positive way? Has this board member helped others to contribute more productively? And then finally, you might want to conduct a chair review. You might want to conduct a bit of a review yourself. This might be something you self-assess. You might do an individual self-assessment review of yourself as a chair. Perhaps you ask another senior officer to do a bit of a review of yourself, or maybe if you can, you might look into getting an independent agency, a third party, to come in and actually provide you quite a comprehensive review of your skills as a chair. If you want to be really bold, perhaps you'd even ask your group to do a bit of a review of you as a chair. So now we'll move on to the last section, which is getting the right people, and this comes down to the issue of recruitment and getting the right volunteers. So when you're looking at bringing in the right people, the first area you want to look at is creating clear assignments. Volunteers deserve a title and a clear role description. Making sure that the purpose of the job, how it's going to help your group achieve its goals, and what their role will be, is really important to getting the right person. Don't just bring people in for the sake of having another bod in the group. Make sure that there's actually a comprehensive understanding of what their job, their title is. It goes a good way towards understanding of the role, a good way towards appreciation of the role. It gives you something to measure people against as well. Are they actually fulfilling what they're there to do? This is also something that should then be reviewed periodically with both staff and volunteers. Make sure that you're constantly ensuring the relevance and the value of those roles. When it comes to recruitment, messages should be realistic and clear about the volunteer assignment expectations. As I said, time commitment and feeling that there's time isn't respected is an issue. It's not one you can necessarily get around, and I'm sure all of you will say this is a significant commitment. This does require work. making sure people know that from early on is a really important one. So build that in, make sure that recruitment messages are clear. Possibly put in place an actual recruitment strategy. Don't just wait until a role is up for someone filling it. Have an active strategy in place. Look to expand beyond your circle. Quite a surprising statistic: 49% of non-volunteers aged 15 to 24 cite not being asked as a reason for not volunteering, compared to 27% of those 65 years and over. That really goes to suggest that there is a bit of an untapped market out there that you can reach into. Don't just look to recruit the same faces, the people who would typically make up volunteering roles. Reach beyond your circle. Look a bit more broadly. Think a bit more diversely. I'm sure you can bring in volunteers from a broad range of backgrounds and a broad range of experiences. Indeed, it's something you should be doing. You want to represent the profession. You want to represent the profession as widely as possible. So constantly being aware of the community, constantly being aware of where else you might look for volunteers is a really important one. And then something to bear in mind, the people that tend to volunteer tend to be the people that volunteer in all aspects and areas of life. I know when we deal with volunteers, the people we're dealing with will often be super volunteers who do lots of volunteering at their professional body, but they'll also volunteer beyond that. They'll be the ones who are volunteering at their children's schools. They'll be the ones volunteering for charities. Be aware of that. Burnout can be a real problem. If you've got a good volunteer, the last thing you want is to burn them out really quickly and take their ability to actually be a good senior volunteer away. So couple of stats that are a bit helpful. The first is around defining the relationship. How do you define the relationship between volunteers and the organization? We ask the professional body sector, and most will issue guidelines, most issue policies and procedures, most have a volunteer code of conduct, and just over half will actually have a job description. Fortunately, we're not seeing many having a formal contract, which is probably not a good idea. And about 12% will actually just hand over the staff handbook to volunteers, and that's what they'll share with their volunteers. If there are any areas there, particularly those ones that are being used by the majority, that you're thinking we don't really have that in place, might be something worth looking at and considering. Where does volunteer recruitment come from is another question that we looked at, and something that I thought would be worth exploring here. Well, about 80% will actually actively advertise for volunteers. 50% will include a job description with that. And about a third will conduct some form of formal interview process. I expect that's probably when they're looking at more senior volunteering roles rather than recruiting for the volunteers that you'll probably spend your time managing. But if you are inundated with a lot of volunteers, it might be something you want to look at, might be something worth considering. At the very least, even if it's not a formal interview, perhaps an informal chat about it, it can be a good way just to help those volunteers understand what will be expected of them, and also why they may want to do it. We have other here. I'll just run through a couple of the ones that made up other that people identified. One was just through the branch structure, recruiting people and connecting with that word of mouth, informal discussions via other committees, nominations committees, and referrals from other volunteers. All good approaches, nothing inherently wrong with that, but obviously you do want to avoid becoming sort of an old boys club. It doesn't want to be come join us. It's a good group. We meet up every now and again, and it's all mates in it together. You do want to make sure you avoid that, but still you're actually actively out there working with people, seeing them day to day. You're seeing the people who perhaps come to meetings a little bit early, focus a bit more attention, pick up on those people, make sure you're talking to them. Then finally, the final thing I wanted to talk about in this session, we asked about what incentives that you might offer to volunteers. And about 21% said that they offer some form of incentive. So not a huge amount. So I wouldn't be too put off if you don't offer something. But to give you an example of what those might be, CPD, is obviously a significant incentive. Networking opportunities as well, free events, discounted training, special offers, free conference and event access, and then recognition and awards. Some even said small gifts, just occasionally giving small gifts to their volunteers, which is a nice thing to maybe consider every now and again. So just a bit of a recap, our top tips for managing volunteers. Offer inductions, make them formal, concerning actual tasks, procedures, roles, expectations, and probe concerns. From the beginning, understand what their concerns are, what their issues are, what drives them, what motivates them. Look at these from the very moment you bring people into your group. CPD, connect it with CPD, offer some form of CPD. Look at mentoring, consider having second years, mentoring first years, consider development pathways as well. Collective review, do a collective review, consider how you as a group are performing, and then perhaps consider individual review as well. Recruit the right people. And then finally, because otherwise I think it might have all been a bit doom and gloom this session, keep it fun and rewarding. Volunteering should be enjoyable, and it should be rewarding. As we said at the very beginning of this, professional bodies would fail without their volunteers. People give up their time to be part of a larger community, to give something back, to make a positive difference. Everything we've talked about today is about trying to build on that, trying to encourage that, trying to get the absolute best for them. This should be something that people enjoy doing. I'm sure all of you, the fact that you've made it to the level of chair, vice chair, or co-chairs, that you do enjoy this and that it is enjoyable. Make sure that potential volunteers do know that, and make sure the volunteers you do have are kept engaged, that they keep it fun, they keep it rewarding, enjoyable. And that's about it. We've got about 5 minutes left, which is almost perfect. Just to say, for more information, you can visit our website, www.parnglobal.com. You can contact us. We've got some information up there, but I think we'll share my contact details and Robert's contact details after the meeting. But our emails, just to say them, are robert@parnglobal.com and will@parnglobal.com. So any burning issues, or if anything ever comes up where you think, I wonder if Parn could help with that, CIPR, our members of Parn, we're here to serve our members. We'll do our best to help you. That's it from us. I can see we've got a few things in the chat, so I'll just take a
one very quick point, if I may.
Yes.
Throughout our presentation, we have used the phrase job description. Can I suggest that we try and avoid using job description because of legal challenges that have happened in the recent past? Try and use role description and task description. Now, by all means, have codes of conduct and things like that reflect exactly what are issued to staff, but make the distinction by not using job description, which the staff will be used to, but using a phrase like role description, or if it's a very specific thing that a volunteer is being asked to do, then a task description. Makes the distinction and gets around the problem and the risk of being challenged. Just a thought. Okay, have we got any questions? No.
No, which is always a good thing to have. I see you've answered one of the questions in the chat. Just for those that were interested, that was we had someone asking, matters arising at the beginning, how do you keep tabs on what's arisen before? And Robert said, you do still have the opportunity, but you get to the key points of your agenda first. So that's it. I think 4 minutes to go seems to more or less keep us perfectly on track. We do just have 1 or 2 minutes, so if you do have any burning questions, do feel free to post them in the chat. If not, we'll hand back to Paul, who I think will share with you information about what's coming up next.
Yes, thanks. Obviously, Will and Robert, great session. Obviously, really insightful, and I'm sure everyone enjoyed it. We'll just give it a few moments for everyone, if they've got any last minute questions, to obviously type them in the Q&A or the chat. I'll just obviously mention a few things. We are going to, obviously you guys have kindly agreed to share the slides, so we'll share the slides with everyone along with your contact details. So obviously, if anyone does have any more burning questions, they'll be able to get in touch with you guys directly. We have got our group chairs meeting taking place exactly in 3 minutes. So obviously we'll have a quick change around, as in as soon as we finish this one, we'll start the group chairs meeting. So obviously we look forward to seeing everyone there. It doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in. So if what I think we'll do is we'll finish it there, unless
Yep.
you
Just well, one thing to ask Will, actually, because he'll be the one that circulates all the slides. Can you also include the bit about the roles and responsibilities of trustees and directors? I think that's pertinent. We didn't have time to do it because it's half a day session in its own, but we will circulate some slides on that for you as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, so if you see any slides that you don't recognize, perhaps have a quick look at them, and they'll cover everything.
Yeah.
Amazing, excellent. So I think we'll call it a day. Obviously, I'd like to thank Robert and Will, and obviously Parn, for a great session, and obviously taking the time out to present today. And I'll see everyone in a few moments on the group chairs meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Good luck.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Take care.
Cheers. Bye-bye.